Toutes mes excuses d'être arrivé un peu en retard.
I apologize for being slightly late, but I had a very interesting discussion with a Latvian journalist, and I do hope that Latvian colleagues will find an article in newspapers. If he really publishes everything I said to him, it'll be interesting. We will change our program. Our colleague János Vértes will be the first to take the floor, and I thank him for that he attends our meeting. And now I give the floor to him immediately, without delay.
And ladies and gentlemen, employers' main messages on involvement of social partners in European economic governance. First of all, I would like to quote from Juncker, President Juncker. He was giving a speech on the 19th of March, 2015, and he stated in the social summit that I'm a strong believer in the social market economy, and the social market economy can only work if there is a social dialogue. Social partners can identify the greatest needs and opportunities, helping us invest, grow, and create jobs. Their support and participation is essential. I said that what I wanted to be a president of social dialogue, and this Commission made a commitment to strengthen social dialogue in Europe and make it an integral part of our jobs and growth strategy. Today, that was his ending the quote. Employers fully support the principles and proposals set out in the declaration by the European social partners on social partner investment in European economic governance. As it is stated in the declaration, the European social partners consider that the process of European economic governance is needed. The aim is to improve the coordination of national policies and reforms, striking the right balance between economic, financial, and social objectives. It is important that the social partners, both at the EU and national level, have a role and are involved in the European economic governance and the various stages of the European semester. Social partners' involvement in the economic governance must be timely and meaningful. This involvement should not delay the European semester processes. Social partners' involvement shall take place within the framework of the existing structures, for example, the Social Dialogue Committee, the Employment Committee, etc. The specific status of social partners in issues concerning labor markets and social protection system must be recognized when also other stakeholders are being consulted. European economic governance processes are important for the promotion of growth and jobs. Through the country-specific recommendation, the Commission should encourage Member States to stabilize public finances and carry out structural reforms. The CSR should reflect the need of employers and workers at the national level. National reforms cannot be the responsibility of the EU and its institutions. The political decision makers in the Member States must be committed to carrying out structural reforms. Many Member States are failing to implement important recommendations concerning, example, labor markets. It is, of course, important that the process for involving social partners in the economic governance are clear, but the involvement cannot be just about the process. Most importantly, social dialogue and social partners' involvement in the European economic governance must contribute positively to carrying out the necessary structural reforms and to lead to concrete results such as labor market reforms, increasing the flexibility of labor markets and improving the functioning of the labor markets. And the member states are increasing the sustainability of social protection system. The issue of pay is excluded from the EU competences, and the decision of how to organize wage bargaining is a national competence. Accordingly, wage negotiations are organized in member states in accordance with the features and tradition of the industrial relations system. Unlikely in competitors such as the US, EU has not been able to recover from the crisis and to bring down unemployment. Just give you some information. In June 2014, there were 25 million unemployed in Europe, which is 9 million more than in 2008. In the last 6 years, 5 million jobs have been lost in the EU compared to around 1 million jobs created in the US. In the meantime, the US has added 10 million jobs, and total employment now exceeds the pre-2008 recession period. We have to respond to the EU's most urgent social challenge to boost job creation and to increase employment participation. We need social dialogue to find solutions to the problems we face today: lack of competitiveness and insufficient investment flows. Social dialogue must contribute to improving competitiveness at national and EU levels. This is the only way to trigger investments and to boost growth and job creation. This calls for autonomous, responsible, and strong social partners with a joint vision on the challenges facing us. The increased unemployment, including youth unemployment and social challenges caused by the financial crisis, can only be solved by creating competitive businesses, environment where companies can create jobs. Just again some information. EU output remains 0.2% lower than its pre-crisis peak, while the US economy is already 8% higher than in 2008. During this period, the economy in China has grown by 64% and in India by 48%. I think it's a great challenge. Autonomy of social partners must be respected. If needed, better regulation. Employers welcome the Commission's increased commitment to better regulation. The amount and scope of EU acquisitions in the field of labor law and social affairs is already very extensive. There is no need for additional legislation. In the field of social legislation, the focus should be on ensuring proper implementation, application, and enforcement of the existing acquisitions and cutting unnecessary red tape. Thank you very much for your attention.
Sir János.
János, lūdzu. Un šeit mēģinam, we are trying to simplify things within the framework of our committee. It is, we shouldn't use bureaucratic laws as a pretext in order to make progress. We shouldn't look at that simply we haven't got the enterprises and the jobs, but we must turn to those employers who believe that it is possible to achieve progress. If there is no additional regulation, we must comply with the regulations that we have. We need to come to agreement about things that seemed evident. I don't want to criticize. Our opinions differ a little bit, but I would like to remind you that a big part of employers voted against the regulation on minimum law, and many employers actually apologized about it. That was a step that was in favor of the enterprises, but not the workers. In this way, a big group voted against these social measures. We may keep up the dialogue as we are friends, but within the framework of social dialogue, this way we work in the Committee of Economy and Social Workers. Thank you very much for your time. It is still not the end of our meeting, and now I shall give the floor to our next friend, Mr. Józef Niemiec, who is Deputy General Secretary of the ETUC, and we shall have debates afterwards, of course. And we shall devote time to these questions. I see that the hall is half empty. I think that we shall finish our work a bit earlier. Sorry, I have no text. Sorry, no text in the English booth. Yes, it is there. Yes, now we shall have interpretation. Thank you. Sorry. Everything is all right now. I will try to continue. I see that everything works with a small delay. As you are smiling, I need to say that this question seems to be self-understanding, that as my colleague said, we have a joint declaration about the questions that we discussed, and we passed it together with the organizations of employers. I will try to speak about other things. When we look at this governance, you will see that also in the speeches that will follow me, it is important to speak about strategy up to 2020. It is clear that the European semester that we speak about with our employers is a tool to implement strategy 2020. And this work that is done at the level of the EU, together with the macro economic analysis, as we analyze annual growth and the programs of separate EU countries, these important questions are discussed. These are common goals in respect of 2020 strategy, and the main element and the focus is on economy and the budget, how to reduce debts and deficit. This is a factor that by which we decide these questions. As the previous speaker mentioned, even with lower results in respect of employment and our fight against poverty, the question arises, is this governance that is connected with Strategy 2020? If we cannot implement these objectives, we cannot fight against poverty. What about these investments at the macroeconomic level? This question is very important. I don't want to be a pessimist. I want to say if we look around and see what has happened to our capacity to participate in this process at the EU level, I do not want to speak about the member states. We need to recognize that starting with the beginning of this process, we have made progress. We have been struggling to be able to voice our opinion so that our points of view are visible and of course we perform what has been decided, and our decisions are published together with the statement of the Commission in the site where the Commission documents are about the growth document, and you can find it also in other sites. For example, in the sites of the labor organizations. If our points of view about the process are listened to, although we had very little time in order to act, the Commission adjusted this process so that we should have more time before the publication, so that we could express our opinions. And now, the publication of the statement about each member state became part of the Commission working document. All the information was submitted in good time. I believe that the procedure has been improved, and that allows us to participate in this process. And the Commission believes that we have almost reached the limits of our capacities. The statements have been evaluated, and we had meetings with representatives of the EU member states, from Sweden, from Italy. They also participated in these negotiations, and we had to talk over all these statements. I believe that I must speak about those things that are connected with presidency. For example, the informal meetings with EPSCO. with those ministers who are directly responsible for social matters, for social affairs and employment. All these debates gave us a possibility to take the floor for some 20 minutes. Also, today we have such a situation that we can participate in all debates. And we shall be able also in the future to discuss the social dialogue and the salaries. So there are improvements, that's the conclusion. Our answer to all this, we want to participate in this process.
And we want to expand this process. And we want to call it discussions with the ministers, because these are matters which are related also to macroeconomics. It means we have to widen this process to stimulate debate and I would like to express my concerns to you. And the first concern is, I wouldn't like to speak long about it, is the question what capacity we have to participate in these processes. For some, it's mandatory, and these activities very often are coupled with what you do now. Should we now give up the earlier activities just to participate in this process? That is a huge problem. And I think about it in relation to all those who cooperate with us. That really is a problem. At the moment, approximately half of the member states whom it most applies to and who need it most of all have lower capacity. The question is how we are going to structure our work to be able to do it well. And I don't want to go into detail how we could accomplish this task, how we could organize meetings about specific cases concerning some specific country at the European level. Moreover, because the Commission has the contact points in all the member states. A second element is that even in the formal sense, the reaction of other participants, we would like to have people who would be responsible for this process, that we would have partners that would participate in the process concerning employment, concerning other matters, because very often we also get messages which are negative and contrary to the expected. I don't mean here the organizations which at times are more involved in selection or analysis. If we want to influence processes at the European level, we have to find some common points and some common way of expressing themselves, not to fall into banalities, but to move forward. This distribution of responsibility between the European level and the national level is still not clear, and it should be clarified. There's another very essential matter, and I don't want to go into detail about that either, and it's the openness of this process concerning the non-governmental organizations. We should have well-substantiated debate, in particular in view of the strategy 2020. How to ensure this? Do we need a new forum? To unite the forces during this semester, or this could be the place where people could meet and they could try to find some common touch. And I'm saying this because I understand your involvement in this, in Strategy 2020 that you have developed in Commission. If we speak about the content, it's even a more interesting issue. I mentioned this question when I spoke about budget governance or general governance, and should it be also economic governance? If we want to combine it with the Strategy 2020, if we speak about all these matters, so the question related to poverty does not act as an engine, and we say that we need indicators, we need to change the debate, we should involve also decision makers, and the question is whether we can find other budget opportunities. But is it really enough when we look at the context where this process takes place? From this point of view, everything that was done concerning the macroeconomic budget governance and all other instruments that actually complete this process, I do not know if there is sufficient space to speak about these social aspects. And the answer of Minister for Finance is usually negative. Well, should these matters be discussed? But do we have the funds for it? Or perhaps we should change the terms and conditions of the agreement? And why should we do this? All these issues are very important. And in conclusion, two types of conclusions. Well, or rather an invitation or appeal. Well, there are the challenges we have to face, and we see that this governance that exists to date is governance which has at its center a reduction achieved through austerity measures, and even though the attitude has become more flexible, this issue remains. It's not only Greece, it's also France and other countries, and the answer is it's not only supervision over public funds, but better instruments are needed. As it was said in Frankfurt 2 days ago, these are structural reforms, and Mr. Juncker mentioned the example of Portugal and Spain. These are the reforms that we have to undertake. These are reforms for competitiveness. And this way, we invite you to act. And he also said, and his speech should be analyzed in detail, he said in particular in respect of fiscal and monetary union that we need a system that allows to traverse the countries so that we could stimulate competitiveness in countries that have lost their competitiveness, and we should also stimulate manufacturing. And each country should find an opportunity that it can find to do it. And I believe that this governance is related to Strategy 2020 to fight against poverty on how to increase competitiveness and how each country, for example, like it has been done by Latvia, or Lithuania, or Portugal, by changing the macroeconomic conditions, whether participation in this process will justify everything, and we will justify it in the face of workers who work in a specific sector only by publishing a statement, an announcement about governance. Well, that is our analysis. Unemployment, growth of development, and equality. What answers do we have of these questions and the relationship, the South and the North? These mechanisms are financed by countries. And it's interesting to observe how each country is moving forward concerning these issues. And now, if we decide to participate and to continue to participate, then the question is whether that is enough. I believe that's a challenge to our conference, and we should have the courage to start these discussions so that we could understand what is actually taking place, and the government agencies should also do this. The International Labour Organization should do it. And the question is whether in this context this governance can give some value added to the member states, and in particular the trade unions. And we do not require compulsory changes in these rules to equalize our capacities. And here I have two questions. We will discuss it in a committee that prepares the work, and the question will remain open until the Congress. We encounter very mixed and confusing situations. When I needed to defend the European integration in Poland, I supported the participation of Poland in the EU for social dialogue, for the role of trade unions. These were the positive elements we could discuss. And we still have the same capacity when we have to discuss these issues, for example, about the single currency. I would not recommend it to my colleagues, but Poland joins the euro. I'm quite serious about it. I meet with friends, and their views could also help us find answers that correspond to our ambitions and to our capacity, so that we could convince each other how to find better answers. I actually put more questions to you than gave answers, but as you are a committee that works also in this format, I permitted myself the liberty to put these questions. It's quite normal that during the period before the Congress, there are more questions than answers. And now we will listen to Ms. Raita Karnīte. Mrs. Karnīte is the head of an economic forecast center. Now let's have a look what those forecasts are.
Thank you, Mr. President, dear guests and colleagues. I could speak Latvian, but since my presentation is in English, let me speak English and forgive my mistakes if any. So I was asked to speak about involvement of social partners in European economic governance. It's a very important question since European economic governance per se is a very important process which is just in the beginning, but still it is something which will happen for sure. And I'm going to tell you about I was asked to tell about two studies which were prepared for Latvian Trade Union Confederation, and one more which is prepared for Eurofund, for Dublin's Foundation, where we are country correspondents. So these two are first the role of trade unions in implementation of Europe 2020, which was conducted in September last year, and the European economic governance and its impact on activities of trade unions in Latvia, which was finished in December last year. And the third is national contribution to Eurofund's new study, which is not yet finished, the role of social partners in the national reform program and in the European semester, which was conducted in January, February this year within the Eurofund's working program. Regarding methodology, it was simple in all three, because all three are very short time studies. First two studies are expertise, just evaluation of policy documents and existing situation and publications on this issue, and also national contribution to the Eurofund study is not deeper investigation, it is interviews with social partners on filling of unified EU-level questionnaire. So what we got from the study on role of trade unions in Europe 2020. First, it is, of course, we all know what is Europe 2020, but still there are some things which I would like to remind you. It is strategy for growth and employment for period until 2020, and it aims at smart, sustainable and inclusive growth. All aspects are important for social development. It follows 5 headline targets in employment, innovation, education, poverty reduction, climate and energy sector, and more than 10 particular targets. And first 4 headline targets are for sure concern social development. These stated objectives should be achieved by implementation of 7 flagship incentives. Of these 4 concern social development. It is based on closer coordination of economic policy, higher centralization, in order to increase long-term growth potential and competitiveness of European economy. And with this statement, actually, it starts implementation of principles of economic governance in European Union. And main instruments for this long-term implementation are single market, financial instruments, investment, external policy instruments, and if you remember, it was divided on 2 parts, long-term and short-term, and for short-term implementation it is crisis prevention, where we all know what are measures. And we may say that all these measures are of economic nature. Europe 2020 is a complicated 10-year policy that concerns wide scope of socio-economic development issues and fields where trade unions are responsible for. So the role of trade unions in Europe 2020 cannot be questioned. And when we analyze targets, we see that in many of targets, trade unions may participate almost in all, except some technical targets like CO2 emissions and energy issues, but we know that in Latvia there was experience that trade unions were deep involved also in elaboration of energy policy. And the greatest challenge which trade unions have regarding Europe 2020 is this big contradiction between social nature of Europe 2020 targets and dominance of economic instruments for their implementation or achieving. What we can say about the role of trade unions in Europe 2020? They are mentioned in policy documents quite often, and their role is indicated very higher, but mostly in fields which actually are not very important for trade unions. For instance, in industrial policy, in globalization most frequently trade unions are within the role of social partners, but in this it is quite difficult to understand which of social partners in these combinations, named as social partners, have bigger role, trade unions or employers. Because when we speak about economic measures, then of course employers have more interest than trade unions. It is said that coordinating action with social partners is on the background of success of Europe 2020. And that increasing of partnership with social partners is a general task. It is stressed. But when we look on these duties of social partners, they are not so significant, and we cannot see social partners in connection with employment issues, which are indeed important for, let's say, your group or trade unions. And what is very important is that participation of trade unions is not reflected in reports on implementation. They are listened, they participate, especially in Latvia. I can say that there are discussions with trade unions and social partners in general, but their views are not reflected in the results and implementation documents, written in documents, even if they are integrated somehow, but not explained as opinion of trade unions. Concerning national legislation, the role of trade unions is even less stressed, and I will not repeat all this, that there is inconsistency between different documents, that there is, you cannot find name social partners or trade unions in all places where it could be mentioned, and again, not in implementation results. However, social partners have a lot to say on implementation and on consequences of implementation of measures. And we may say that these observations maybe are connected with some national peculiarities, but we can read it also in studies. Regarding European economic governance, which I would say is next step, we may only say that it is very important. If we have monetary unions and unified or at least strongly coordinated economic governance is very important. It promotes also successful implementation of Europe 2020. It is one of preconditions, and includes these three main stages: monitoring, prevention, correction. And again, if we evaluate the role of social partners from the point of view of European economic governance, their role and so on, we should say that European economic governance means centralization of power on European level. And of course, centralization and decentralization may be effectively connected, but we should see that this European economic governance sets very important conditions for economic development. It is in banking and financial systems in Europe, in addition to European single market, in addition to research and innovation policy, and there is no responsibility for social development, at least up to now. Idea of social Europe is somehow forgotten. I should say that recently the idea of social governance appeared, and we attended the meeting of European Foundation for Improving of Living and Working Conditions, and representatives of this foundation was really very glad that there is discussion on more social Europe, more solving of more social issues, not only economic, but this is only should be done. Up to the moment, we see drastic normatives, drastic governance methods, penalties if some of these normatives are not observed. Country specifics, we cannot say that it is taken into account because it's like an average temperature in hospital, which doesn't fit to every country. And we may speak also about some unequal approach, and that role of social partners is diminished. It is mentioned in very many of available studies. And also Eurofund research, which I mentioned, says that social partners formally are involved. They may participate, they may sit in all meetings, open all doors, say whatever they want, but this all is not documented into proper way and is not observed. And what is very important for consequence of European economic governance for social partners is that important part of decision making is taken on higher level, on EU level, and the main development parameters are determined there. And that means that whatever trade unions or even employers' organizations say, they get answer on local level, they get answers that this is already decided on the EU level. So it is very good argument. However, local decisions are also very important because at least we have to understand what happens, what these new proposals give for us or ask from us. And trade unions nowadays should be able to follow decision-making process at all levels, and it is, as it was said here, it is very difficult for them. It is the complexity of problems for trade unions to be solved increase, and their capacity opposite doesn't increase, but because the membership is reducing. And what we can see as general conclusions that both Strategy Europe 2020 and European economic governance are aimed at increasing cooperation and in elaborating and implementation of economic policy. And they are focused on economic growth, and they are beneficial for European Union as a community of countries, and that means for every country. This is from the positive sides. But it makes changes, and that means that social partners, if they want to use benefits from the new conditions, and these are new conditions which are developing very fast, they should be able to be involved, to have full right participants in all these very complicated process. And we see that business interests are still, as we could see that economic measures are stressed on business interests are primarily observed, both in Europe 2020 and also in objectives of European economic governance. Trade unions may participate, but how much can they say? And I am almost sure that the situation which appears is more favorable for employers, and that is why employer organizations are usually more satisfied with the situation which appears. While capacity of trade unions to deal with such wide scope of issues actually is not estimated. If they can, and the impact of trade unions diminishes because membership diminishes, and the need for innovations in trade unions' work become evident. In Latvia, as we heard today in the morning session, social partners have very good institutional basis for participation. Collective bargaining and industrial action is supported by law. Trade union members are protected by labor law. National Tripartite Cooperation Council is operating. We have regulations of Cabinet of Ministers which said that all important issues for trade unions should be discussed with social partners, and it indeed happens. Social partners may participate in all meetings, in all working groups, in committees of SAIMA and of Cabinet of Ministers. But again, these critical issues is, and this is more for trade unions than for employers' organizations, but actually for both of them, is capacity, implementation of agreements, and impact at decision-making level. Capacity is concerned with decreasing membership, and it is because, not only because of bad work of, let's say, trade unions, but because of new tendencies in the economy, new forms of job, promotion of small business, very different, which I will not mention here. And I have calculated that just 8.2% of market sector enterprises in Latvia theoretically may have employers' representatives. That means that only this part of enterprises may participate in social dialogue, about which we said that it is widespread, it is so effective, and so on. It is like I remember 2 days ago in a meeting of Eurofund here in Riga on a third company survey, representative of European Trade Union Confederation said, you may want whatever you want and speak whatever you speak, but the role of social dialogue depends on how many of participants you have in this. And if you may cover just 8.2% of enterprises, it is more in terms of employees, but still it's not big coverage. So what to do? I would say 3 points. It is first, improve representation, both direct membership and also representation, to change representation model so that to involve more small enterprises, those who are in non-traditional works, somehow to involve more people into social dialogue, to improve partnership in social dialogue, because we, for instance, in our country, we do not have relevant employers' organizations, and this is why social dialogue on sector level is not developed, but sector level social dialogue in conditions which appear will be very, very important. This is some instrument which can involve more small enterprises and so on. To cover all levels, to increase capacity and to increase effectiveness of trade union instruments, and maybe also to change a bit work of employers' organizations, because many of employers' organizations which are members of even LDDK in Latvia do not recognize themselves as much as employers' organizations. They more recognize and operate as business promoters, what is also not only in Latvia. to increase activities in EU level. So if decision-making raise up, so also operation of social partners should raise up to go to higher levels. And I am very much sure that collective bargaining on all levels, and especially on sectoral level, will be very important. And this will be a main tool for achieving trade union goals and employers' goals because it is something which is documented, which should be observed by law, which is very important. And how to involve more participants in collective bargaining, how to cover more. There are, of course, maybe different versions. It may be an administrative regulated system. We do not want such, but we go into another conditions. Maybe we should think about this. Should it be voluntary process, but we see that it doesn't work very well? Should it be facilitated by economic stimulus? We have some proposals here in Latvia. We want to use taxes, for instance. Should it be cooperation? In the end, I want to say that maybe things are indeed improved because also business understands that employers cannot live without employees. So they should, and Latvian example shows it, and your questions from audience also show that you understand that if workers are not satisfied in free labor markets, they simply leave country. So something should be done, and we see that something appears also in EU level, and we have our own representative as as high-level person on social dialogue issues in European Commission. So we see all these changes, and we hope that they will benefit all of us. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Karnīte. I believe, and I think my colleagues will join me, that your analysis was exceedingly interesting. Perhaps you would agree to give me a copy of your presentation, and now I give the floor to you. So, the list is open. So the floor is given to Jean Xavier Verbaven. It's quite difficult because actually the overhead lights are shining straight into our eyes. Can't see you. Is there anyone else who would like to take the floor? All right, then off we go. Run. I cannot speak Spanish. Well, all right. I will survive this test. I will speak a little bit of French. I want to thank this wonderful colleague who introduced us to these findings on this wonderful research. And I took the floor to repeat once again, and I want Józef to put it down for the next Congress, and I believe that the new period will begin, and I think we have to start already now. And I think we should start. The European Commission is a guarantor for the implementation of the EU norms, and the political task of the Commission is for this European regulation to be applied in the member states. The Commission nominated the European Commission submitted to the Parliament and to the Council a proposal for a regulation. And this regulation, which is a law for all funds, including the social fund and all other funds, all those who finance Strategy 2020 are subordinated to this regulation. Article 5 of the regulation states that each member state must ensure participation must ensure in particular participation of trade unions and employers organizations, and to ensure that these organizations are accepted as participating organizations also in respect of the Parliament and the Council. And every time we see, I do not know how to put it in French, we fail to comply with the law because the regulation is the law, and we do not comply with it. And the first not to comply is the Commission, because the Commission does the balance when the funds have been expended. No question is ever asked, because even if the regulation states that this must be done, they never ask about the participation of social dialogues, what their participation was at the national level. And it goes on all the time, with the exception of the social fund. We have representation at the national level, but so this is never asked also concerning the common agricultural policy. And I have suspicion that also in Juncker's plan, it will not be done at the national level. It will not be controlled at the national level. And it's not evident, it's not obvious that so the participation of social partners is required. But we have this regulation, which is the law, and it already prescribes the provisions concerning representation, concerning collective agreements. Everything depends on the member states. The Commission always says that each member state is different, so it seems that every member state can do whatever it likes. But actually we have got Strategy 2020, and it's our responsibility and duty because it's paid for by European funds, and we have to comply with the regulation. My proposal is to really give serious thought to this. But, well, the Employment and Social Committee should think about it, and others should think about it, because we have the European Court of Justice where we could go, because the regulation is not complied with. And that is the most important instrument we have at our disposal. Does that mean that the controlling entities will disappear from our landscape? We speak about general goals, but we also have to speak about European policy. I'm a civil servant, and I know that any goal, any objective that is not included in the budget is just advertisement and propaganda. We have to speak about proposals that come from the Commission, and at the same time we have to speak about the budget, because the law, well, in this case the regulation, stipulates this, and we have our role to play The Commission, unfortunately, sometimes forgets its functions that have been prescribed by the agreement. Thank you. I have got two comments about what we heard. I agree that in every democracy that respects itself and within the framework of economic and social democracy, social partners, and in particular trade unions, is the opposite lever. They're actually, if you look at the scales, it's the opposite cup of the scales, well, in respect of the policymakers and employers, and all employees and employers are interested in negotiations. Employers are interested in negotiations with trade unions, the same as politicians are interested in working with trade unions. And I'll tell you why. Because the political decisions that are not perceived by the civil society or trade unions, if they do not get to those levels, encounter difficulties, because whatever happens, there are various protests, manifestations, there are conflicts. There are usually ways how to express one's dissatisfaction. If people are not introduced, are not told what the trade union and civil society take care of and think about. There are also political decisions which are implemented by trade unions and by social partners, for example, in the field of employment. Other political decisions, in particular in the subsidized sectors, are also discussed with social partners, and there will be social partners who implement it. Trade unions also have the mission of sort of the early alert system, early warning system. Well, the government may not listen to the civil society, but the trade unions will be the one to ring the bell of alarm, and politicians and employers, if they were interested to have a dialogue with the civil society, and in particular trade unions, and when we implement it in the context of Strategy 2020, then even now we must conclude not only at the European level, but also in the member states, the social dialogue is not respected. And we have, at the moment, examples. You know that the Commission has put forward its proposals to the member states, and the member states must develop a national reform program, and they must explain how these proposals of action will be implemented. And I'm absolutely certain that in each EU member state, these plans are not controlled by social partners. Either we use processes of discussion that are not required by anyone, by announcing the themes for tomorrow's meeting now, the day before. Social partners and trade unions, nobody speaks to social partners and trade unions, and this takes place now. It took place 10 years ago in several member states, even in Europe, these trade unions are not respected at all, neither by politicians nor by employers. In particular, as to the NGOs, non-governmental organizations, it's very difficult for them to get through, and it's very difficult to recognize that they may have any impact on the processes. These are the problems to be treated as social partners. These are problems we have at the level of the committee and also at other levels. Thank you, John.
Thank you. Just to mention a point in relation to the presentation, the last presentation we received last month, the Commission published a Commission staff working document titled Industrial Relations in Europe 2014, and it does contain data and information relative to the last presentation. So as well as if we can get the slides circulated or the presentation circulated, it may be useful just to draw people's attention to that document. And secondly, picking up from that particular document, it also covers a point raised this morning by our colleague from the Latvia Trade Union Confederation about the minimum wage level in Latvia, which he quoted at €360 per month. Now, according to the Commission data, minimum wage levels in Europe range from €205 per month in Romania to €1,921 per month in Luxembourg, with a number in between. Now, I accept that the setting of a minimum wage rate is not a simple, straightforward point. It has to take account of a number of factors, including the average earnings, particularly the cost of living, how the state organises its public services, perhaps, and so on. But nevertheless, it appears to me that the Latvian minimum wage rate and others are shockingly low, even in respect of those states. And I believe that has consequences for other European countries. There's a minimum wage in one country is not a matter that can be considered totally in isolation from the impact in other countries. And I do think that this is something, secondly, that this group and the EESC might consider. I know there are complications as in relation to wage bargaining and state responsibility, but I think it is something we should consider. We have a phrase we used to use, is we should not waste a crisis. But who is going to influence the minimum wage in countries? It has to be the trade unions. It has to be through social partnership, principally. And I think the theme of this conference is solidarity, to build a socially just Europe. And I think a place that has to start is with minimum wage levels. So I think that's something we should consider.
Thank you very much, John. Carmelo, c'est le dernier intervenant, et puis je passerai la parole à nos deux orateurs.
Tātad ir vēl, thus we have two more speakers. Thank you very much. Thank you, George. I would like to express one proposal. First of all, it's nothing new. The fact that the financial economic crisis in the European zone has weakened the role of trade unions, both in separate EU countries and thus also at the level of the whole of the EU. Of course, we can always find positive and optimistic aspects, but I believe that we have very big problems to make good progress. My second observation is we need not only economic governments at the level of the EU, otherwise we make mistakes in trade unions. Indeed, if we want to do something in a different way, we need political governance at the EU level. And here I'm speaking about the Eurozone. In the opposite case, everything will go on the way it has been. We speak a lot, we pass unnecessary documents, but the actual facts turn out to be different very often with negative consequences. I will not go on with this analysis. This has been done a number of times. I believe that as to the trade unions and employers, it is for us impossible to apply the same methods and go on, continue working in the way it was done in the past. That will be impossible, especially when we oppose to globalization. We remember the times. So it doesn't mean that the globalization will not take place. If it doesn't, well, if we object, it doesn't mean that the thing will not happen. The Greek problem is not only a Greek problem; it's also our problem. It's not that simply some EU countries have become poor. It is not enough to say that trade unions are necessary to defend the social model. We must act at the political level. We must behave in a different way. I am saying to you, friends, and to myself, not to divert from the theme. You spoke nice words. It is still, there is still a big problem, like a black hole. The Economic Committee has mentioned it a number of times. It is like fried air. We have no economic tools. We have a huge 5-year program, but it may be sometimes ridiculous. We go on discussing it, George, what it should be like. We risk to get funny. We shouldn't actually do it. If we had passed the right decisions, what should we do? In my opinion, we need to think it over, to reconsider. Companies alone will not get very far if there are objections to them, if there are many economic difficulties. How to make steps forward in respect to the political level and decision-making. It would be more simple for us. We need to participate at the spring summit meeting. The aim was to coordinate economic policy at the highest level. It became formal. we need to demand that coordination should become compulsory, and the decisions that we're going to make must become operative, so that trade unions should hand in proposals in a compulsory way. We should create a new, at least try to create the same coordination levels, coordination methods, both at the level of the EU and also in separate member states. For example, about labor issues, because these labor issues become social problems. This situation cannot continue like that. We need to have unified conditions, joint efforts. Trade unions must participate as well. We must create new methods, and we must adopt this methodology, all of us, everywhere, in Spain and Italy, everywhere.
C'est vrai. Je dois trouver le temps pour.
I should find time not to miss the plane. I get the impression that the discussion shows that there are no special differences among us. That is the way I feel it.
And what was said about our responsibility, that we might be the other end of the scale to balance it. We decided to participate in the debate concerning governance. What conditions should be there so we can act? So we'll look at what has been said by other colleagues, and there are two elements that were outlined to take into account what is already there. That's very important. So we have worked on these matters in the committee, and we'll fight for that together. But I believe that as concerns the Economic and Social Committee, I think we can also improve the conditions and terms. And even if we criticize the European Union when it sets the wages, then actually the pressure to lower the wages actually was resisted, and we resisted it. And we believe that that would reduce competitiveness. But in our discussions, we insist that we speak not only about the minimum wage, but about remuneration at all, which is a very important means. And when the frame of this governance, that's an important element. And we'll speak about it, and we will discuss it. And as it was already said, there will be negotiations and discussions with ministers for employment here in Riga in 2 weeks' time. And we will also attend this meeting. And finally, I would like to speak about reactions to these matters. It's actually, it becomes more and more clear, as already said. Well, even those who represent institutions and those people who are not elected by the population, So they also believe that in the expansion of governance, you see also the question of responsibility emerging. It means that there should be more democracy in the process of governance. This is the way we should look for ways how we are going to work and to cooperate. This is the element of democracy that's needed. There are, as you said, we should also remember that this is also a political issue that we should overcome. So the borders of these general outlines, and we have to report mostly to the population. And if we look at the decisions taken by the ECOFIN, and if we don't speak about troikas in member states and we send letters to member states, and as it was said already, that the basic laws are being violated, and we need cooperation with these partners, and we have to know who the European Central Bank reports to. This is what creates problems for us. It's not only me who should participate in this process. Most of you should participate in this process. Most of you will attend the Congress, and at the Congress, we will speak about ways how we will put forward these terms and conditions to European Central Bank. And I would like to suggest that we continue the debate, and even then we might not find all the answers, but it will be useful. Thank you. Mrs. Karnīte, your comments, please.
Very interesting comments, and difficult to create any answer because everything was correct what you said. I agree with all of this. You said that we should not violate European directives. I fully agree, but this happens because there is paper and there is life. And as I said, in Latvia, social partners may participate and are involved. And the problem is not that they cannot achieve something. The problem is that they are, maybe sometimes their capacity is not satisfactory to know all this, to create position, to answer, to choose right position, not to be mistaken. And this is why we think, I personally think that this training process for social partners, both, not only for trade unions, but also for employers' organizations should be continued. There are some funds used, and but again, I want to say, well, I work in European Foundation for more than 20 years, so I have quite good experience on the EU level. It's not that I have been sitting only here in Latvia and know only what in Latvia happens. And regarding trade union problems and these differences between trade union organizations and the employers' organizations is quite characteristic for many countries. That employers want to speak with trade unions, yes, and it is very good if they understand each other. And I think that again we have very good example in Latvia because they indeed understand in some cases each other, but still it is problem for both of them that their opinion not always is fully taken into account. That is a problem, and I would agree and that means that there are two solutions. One is to somehow to force those decision makers to take into account what social partners say, and the second is to make social partners' power so strong that it cannot be somehow not to listen, not to violate it. And this is what I would like to see, and this is why I say that collective bargaining, which indeed involves big mass of people, which involves employees and also employers, and asks them to negotiate, to understand each other, to speak each other, that this is quite important. Then regarding minimum wage, I would agree, but now there is question about levels again, and if we say that minimum wage should be, let's say, 40% from average, it is still very low in low-developed countries. But yes, it is a complicated issue. That crises have reduced the role of trade unions, yes, but we live in society society where crises are normal phenomenon, time to time. So we have to adjust to this. I'm economist by my profession, so this is why I say that somehow there also should be solutions, because social partners should find solution how to adapt to situations. It is their main duty and task to find solutions how to operate in new conditions, in what is changes, how to adapt to this. But regarding these European tendencies to centralization on the European level, which I see as very fast process, I think that we should not neglect the impact of this process. It is important that countries are very different, and not always it is possible to find some maybe relief, some differences for specific differences, specific conditions for those countries which need something other. And a very good example of this is inflation, because we know that inflation is not very good thing. But if you are a very underdeveloped country, you cannot get developed without inflation. Because you have low wages, you have low prices, and you should raise wages and raise prices. And raising of prices exactly is what inflation means. And that means that you cannot, how to say, use one decision for all countries. There should be differences, and even well-developed countries got fast development using high inflation, higher than normatives of European Union says. Let's take Germany, for example, before crisis, as an example of this. So, but for European economic governance, the most important point will be how these two sides will be coordinated, economic development and social development. And of course, if you make restrictions of economic development, which is, I would say, essence of European economic governance in many aspects, then you cannot expect social development. And if there is no good social development, you get problems into economic development. And this is my very strong position that these two processes, directions, economic development and social development, should be coordinated and taken as together. Of course, social development is big responsibility and costly process. And this is why it is better to say, oh, it's responsibility of local, of national countries. But if they do not have possibilities for economic development, they cannot provide social development, whatever it is. And that means that there is emigration, there is problems with labor force, with education, with healthcare, and all what we actually experience. Thank you.